First, unfortunately, Brandon could not make it tonight, so it's me again. We're sad that he couldn't make it. And so today, I am really excited to introduce Pleuni Pennings. Pleuni received her PhD from University of Munich, where she led theoretical work that was fundamental to our understanding of soft selective sweeps. Later, she did a postdoc at Harvard and Stanford University, where her work revealed important insights about HIV resistance. In 2014, she took a faculty position in the biology department at San Francisco State, where she continues her work on viral evolution. In addition to being an amazing scientist, Pleuni is a great student mentor. She is committed to training first-generation undergraduate students, and she has created opportunities for them to break into research. For example, she organizes summer research programs that teach students how to code, how to be part of collaborative research projects, how to read scientific literature, and how to do science communication. I personally admire her science and her efforts to increase diversity, and I am always learning new things from Pleuni, and I am so delighted that she's here tonight. Thank you, Pleuni.
Thank you, Amelia. And thank you, everyone, for being here at night after dinner. I'm sure many of you are tired, and so it's great that you're still here, to listen to my story. So, if you're a population geneticist, you may know me from the work that Amelia already alluded to on soft sweeps. This paper I wrote together with Joachim Hermason, who was my PhD advisor, who is an amazing PhD advisor. This is the paper where he actually coined the term soft sweeps. And it's still being cited, and I'm looking forward to it hitting 1,000 citations because I don't know, I want to like throw a party or something like that. You may also know me from more recent work, a lot of work on viruses and drug resistance. And some of the people who are, the first authors on these papers are here, like Alison Feeder, Victoria Caudale, and Kao Tisthammer. And I've been very lucky to work with, many amazing people. Or you may have seen some of my videos. I usually include a little video as part of my talks. And, they've been seen by population geneticists or evolutionary biologists. But a couple of years ago, in the beginning of the pandemic, I collaborated with Brandon, and I think Brandon is listening from the East Coast, and Sanayed Barak. We made some videos about COVID and the pandemic, and they ended up reaching millions of people, so that was really exciting. But, if you would have told me, no, that's good, that's good. If you would have told me when I was young that I would be a biologist and that I would be known, I would be a biology professor, people would know me for my work in biology, I would have probably not believed you, because as a kid in elementary school and high school, I was never interested in biology. I thought that biology was about memorizing parts of animals and plants, and that didn't interest me much. I was interested in many other things, including art and music and math and physics. And I always did really well in math and physics. And so when it was time for me to go to college, to go to university, I picked as a major math and physics as a combined degree. And I was super excited. I went relatively far away from home and, I enrolled in these classes. And initially, I really liked it, but after a couple of months, things started to get a little boring. The math classes were not particularly hard for me, but they were not particularly interesting either. It just felt like it was more of the same thing as what I'd done in high school. And more problematic, I started to think that if these classes were sort of boring, maybe a life as a mathematician would be boring. So, I started to doubt. And you'd think, if you're not sure, maybe go talk to someone, go talk to a professor or maybe to other students. I didn't do that. In fact, I didn't talk to anyone in the math department or the physics department the entire first year. It wasn't that I didn't talk to anyone at the university. I talked to people in the chamber orchestra. I talked to people at the musical society. And I talked to people who lived in my dorms, especially the other students who came from far away, because they also stayed on the weekends and the breaks. And some of these students were bio majors. And it was sometime during the spring semester of that first year that a little group of these biology majors, they had to do a project. And the project was to sort of write a paper to think about why there were so many species of insects in the world. And I was like, whoa, that's a cool question. And not just it was a cool question, but also like they were working on it together. And it was like a project and it didn't have a right or a wrong answer. And I was like, whoa, I want what they are doing. I was like, that is what I expected university life to be like, to be collaborative and creative. And so even though I'd never been interested in biology before, I decided to switch. I left the University of Aberdeen. I went back home to Amsterdam. I enrolled at the University of Amsterdam, again as a freshman, but now as a bio major. And, I found much more community in the bio department and I really enjoyed it. And, I'm still interested in evolution. So in that sense, it was the right thing. I should have forwarded my slides. Anyway, so I left math because I didn't find a community and I didn't have an idea what a mathematician could do in the future. Now I know that you can do a lot of cool things with math. I didn't know that as a student. I left to study biology, and that experience, I feel like it motivates me to try and to make sure that our students now in 2022, that I want them to find a community in the department where they are, and I want them to see a vision of what they can do in their future. And so I'm going to tell you about how I do that and how we do that at SS State, because of course I don't do that alone. So I was invited here to talk about the coding programs that we run at San Francisco State. And so we run different programs, and I'll tell you a little bit about each of these programs. In these programs, students, learn coding. They learn Python or R or both. They learn some research skills, some data science skills. They learn machine learning if they want to. But I'm not going to talk actually about any of these, the content that we teach them. I'm not going to tell you whether you should start with Python or R or neither or Linux, or, I'm not going to tell you about whether you should flip your classrooms or something like that. What I'm going to talk about today is basically everything that's not in the syllabus. Everything that we do sort of around the content of the classes. So the programs that we have sort of fall in three categories. We have informal, part-time summer programs. They are running right now. Some of them run in the evening, so they're actually running right now. So we have the SKIP program, which is just for learning coding skills. And then we have the Pink Summer program, which is for coding skills and getting research experience. And then we have more formal programs that are open for beginners. We have the Pink Minor, which is for undergraduate students. And then we have the Gold Data Science Certificate program, which is for master students in biology and chemistry to learn data science skills. And then finally, we have a more advanced program, a certificate program, specifically for machine learning for the biotech industry. You don't have to remember any of the names of these programs. So first of all, I want to tell you about what we do and what I think is useful to make sure that the students find the community in the programs, right? So that they get to know each other and they get to know people around these programs. And I think the first thing that I do that is sort of easy and cheap, but I think it's important, is to talk to the students about why I think community is important, why collaboration is important, why they should learn to work in teams, and why it's important to talk to each other about what you're learning, because when you talk to each other about what you're learning, you're going to learn it much better, right? Learning in silence by yourself is very hard. The second thing that we do is we let students work in groups. But of course, you have to do that a little bit in a smart way, because sometimes groups don't work. So one of the things that we do, and this picture is from a class from our for the master students, which I teach with Rory, who's here somewhere, Rory Rolfs over there. This class is a data science class for master students. It has a lecture and a lab. And in the lab, during the time in the lab, the students work together in groups. And this is important because it means that the students don't have to find a time to work together, right? It's hard for students to find a time to work together because oftentimes they have long commutes, they have jobs, they have families, they have other things going on in their lives. And so we let them work together in the classroom during class time. But the other thing that we do in this class is we ask the students every couple of weeks, how do you feel about your group? Right, so we ask them exactly this question. And so they can answer, like, it's going well, I want to stay with my group, or I would like to switch so I can get to know other people, or, either is fine. And I think this is important because it means that students don't have to tell us why they want to switch. They can just indicate that they want to switch. And of course, sometimes, part of the team wants to switch and part of the team wants to stay, and, we have to decide, or sometimes I have to talk to people. Overall, teams usually switch a couple of times in a semester, and students get to know each other, and it seems to work really well. In other programs, we provide more formal leadership in the groups. So for example, in the SKIP program, which is our biggest summer program, when students sign up, we ask them if they have any leadership experience in their job, their church, their dorms, anything, and if they are willing to lead a group in the summer program. And about 1 in 4 of the students who sign up actually indicate that they're okay to lead a group. And so these students then become the team leaders, and they host the Zoom meetings for their team. And we give them pretty precise instructions on how to run these meetings so that they don't have to do much preparation. It's like every meeting is the same thing. You start with check-ins, then you do your reading, you do your discussion, you do your quiet working time, and then at the end you collect questions to share with the staff. And this has worked really well. Our undergraduate students and our graduate students are very capable of leading these teams. At the end of the summer, we always ask all the participants, what they thought about the program and what they liked and what they didn't like. And when we asked them what they liked, the most common answer is that they like their team. And then they say other things too, like there's support, there's a group, there's people. They clearly enjoy the community that they find in this program. Even though, it's all online, it's on Zoom, they're paired with strangers that they've never met before. But at the end of the summer, they really appreciate each other. And then in the PINK program, so this is a funded program. We got a lot of money from NSF for it. We actually hire mentors to meet with the students, and every student who is in one of the PINK classes, goes to class, but they also have to sign up for a 1 hour a week mentor session. And so we have groups of like 5 to 8 students that are grouped with a mentor, and they meet once a week for the entire semester. They get course credit for going to these mentor meetings. And so they get to know a mentor who's often like a student just a year ahead of them, and they get to know other people in the program. So those are some of the things that we do to make sure students find the community in the programs where they are. The other thing that I think is super important is to have a way for students to see what they can do with the skills that they are learning right now. You're probably aware that many biology students, and I'm in a biology department, so that's the main group of students that I work with. Many of them are pre-med, pre-nursing, pre-dentistry, pre-something. And of course, that's really good. We need nurses and doctors and all of these things. But of course, it's also because most students in their lives, they've met doctors, they've seen nurses do work, they've met dentists, but most of them have never met a scientist who does research or who works for a company or like anyone who does the kind of work that many of us do. And so it's no wonder that students do not know about the careers that they could have. So there's a lot of blanks that we can fill in. And I think the way to do that is to tell stories and to talk about people. And so there is actually some really good research on how stories can help students stay motivated in their major. And there is something called the Scientist Spotlight Initiative, which is basically a website where you can download stories in the forms of PDFs with links. And, so if you're like, oh, I would like my students to know about a marine biologist, you type in marine biologist, you'll find a story about a marine biologist. And so you can give that to your students as reading homework. And there's also some really lovely research on how this works and what it, how it changes students' attitudes. And so you can look up Shinsky et al. If you're interested in that research. Personally, I use this website sometimes, but what I really like to do is I like to tell stories of people that I know, including our own alums. And so on my blog, I regularly publish, short interviews with people, and then I let the students in my classes read these stories and write short reflections on them. And so these are just some examples. I had a story about Eleni, who was a lab tech at the time at UCSF. They're going to med school soon, and they're here, I think, or they were here earlier this week. Oh, over there in the back. And Faye, who was a Genentech intern last summer, but then she joined our lab. Faye is here too today. Chris Davies is a Genentech scientist, and then Sabah Hassan is a postdoc and filmmaker in San Diego. And so all of these stories and many more are on my blog if you're interested. And I want to share you one of the reflections that a student wrote about Sabah. So Sabah is a postdoc, but has also made films. And so the student writes, and this is a student in my data science class, she writes, scientists in the media seem to devote their entire lives to only science. And so I appreciate seeing how other scientists are able to stay involved in their creative passions. It makes me hopeful that just because scientist is in my career, it doesn't mean that I have to give up all of the other interests that I enjoy. And I think this is important because, the student is in my data science class, right? So I'm probably worried about, is she learning all the different R packages? And does she understand what machine learning is? But at the same time, she is worried that learning all of these things will make her future boring. And so I feel like I just want to, make sure that students read a lot of different stories because I never know beforehand what's going to resonate with them. And so in this case, the student found out that you can be a postdoc and filmmaker at the same time. How cool. And some of the best stories, of course, come from our alums because they are, just ahead of the students in the classroom. And so I want to share here a little clip of a video with one of our soon-to-be alums. I think she's still finishing up her master's thesis. So this is Amanda.
My name is Amanda, and I'm currently a studying math student who will be able to learn computational skills through the GIFT and BOLD program. And now we'll be joining the immunology program standard in the computational systems immunology track. And I'm confident to do that because of participating in this BOLD program. And so I wasn't even a student at the time, but we were still able to access the GIFT program, and they invited us to the art program meeting GIFT course. And I was participating with a very undergraduate and that was really collaborative time where we were able to still meet new people, but also learn something entirely new in an online matter. And experience and coding, it was pretty cool. The first 6 courses for our programming, that was most difficult because learning coding was learning a whole entire language and was a much short period of time. But I think what was really encouraging is doing it with people who are able to do stuff, but figuring it out together. It opened up a lot of doors, especially when it came to, discoverable Python or machine learning, or how you can incorporate that into your research project. And I thought that was really cool. I think what I gained the most with the GOLD program is setting me up to further enhance my computational skills during the PhD program.
So, Amanda is, as she said, she's a master's student currently. She's going to do a PhD in the fall. She's also, like many of our students, a first-generation student and a woman of color. And that's actually the biggest group in our programs. How am I going to go? Okay. So we talked about community. We talked about a vision for the future. But of course, all of that, I can only help my students with those things once they're in my class, right? Or in my lab or in our program or something like that. And a lot of students, a lot of biology and chemistry students, have a deep fear of anything that's computer science or math. And they may not even sign up for anything that sounds like computer science. And so I actually asked the students in my lab, like, do you remember having that fear before you learned all of these things? And so one of my students, Jamil, he was very honest, and he said, oh yeah, I remember that. I thought I wasn't smart enough to code, or I wasn't the type of person who is able to do it. So he clearly is the type of person who is able to do it. He's here and he's presenting a poster. I think he presented a poster last night, but I'm sure you can still talk to him about his work. But this particular answer resonated with me because me too. I thought that coding was this sort of very special thing that only certain people can learn. And even when I had already started my PhD, I was going to do mathematical population genetics, and I thought coding was not for me. So, that fear is real. And of course, I did learn how to code during my PhD, and I enjoyed it. But we all probably have a lot of fears. We don't have exactly the same fears, but recently I had to step over another fear, and that was the fear of machine learning. I thought that I couldn't do machine learning. And so about 2 years ago, I was in a meeting with this person, Marlena Jackson. She's like a diversity officer kind of person at Genentech, and we work with her a whole lot. Genentech is like a very generous sponsor of many of the programs as a state. And there was this meeting, and she was saying, like, it's all nice that your students are learning Python, and we like that, but they really need to learn machine learning. And if they learn machine learning, we'll hire them. We'll hire them all. They didn't hire them all, but they hired quite a few. So quite a few of our students are actually at Genentech this summer with like nicely paid internships. But in my head, I was like, oh, maybe that's cool for our students, but this is probably where, I sort of step out of this collaboration and I go back to the biology department and I'll let the computer scientists do machine learning, because it's probably a little too hard for me. But, I have lovely colleagues in the computer science department and they trust me more than I sometimes trust myself. And so before I knew it, they had convinced me to teach computer science 508, machine learning and data science for personalized medicine. And it was going to be open not just for our lovely biology students, but of course, computer science students would also be interested and they are going to be in the class. And so I was, super scared because, like I said, we all have our fears and in my head, I have a list of things that I think that I cannot do. And at that time, machine learning was definitely on that list and teaching computer science majors was also on that list. But at the same time, I also knew sort of that it was probably ridiculous to think that I couldn't do it. So I was like, okay, I'm going to try. I had a sabbatical lined up. And so I spent a large part of my sabbatical watching YouTube videos on machine learning. And so I learned, and now I know enough machine learning to teach this class. And I had a lot of fun with it because it's actually fun to learn something new. But, all of this to say that, fear is real and we want students to step over their fear. We have to encourage them and we have to, acknowledge that they have this fear and not ignore it. So one of the things that we do, which is, really simple, but I think it's super important, is that when we make flyers for our programs and for our classes, we add big letters that say no experience needed. Because we found out that if you don't add those words, students are going to assume that it's not for them. They're going to assume that it's for the other people in the class. And so one of our students, Darlene, who was in our first cohort in the PINK program, at the end, when she had finished the program 2 years later, we asked her to reflect on her, her path through the program. And so she remembered very vividly that she was reading the words on the pink flyer, that no prior computer science background is needed. And so she decided to give it a try. And so because of these kind of stories, we know that these words on the flyers are super important. Okay, so all of that I think is important, but it took a story even closer to home for me to realize that even students who are motivated, who are willing to step over their fear, they may not join our programs. And so this story is about Julia Bravo, and she was a student at the time at CSU East Bay. And I knew her really well because she was our nanny for about 2 years. And when my son, Max, went to preschool, she decided to go back to school to get her degree. And she went to CSU East Bay to study environmental sciences. And she did extremely well. And so I encouraged her to sign up for a summer program. There's these lovely summer programs. I specifically told her about NSF supported REU programs, research experience for undergraduates. And, I told her, you should apply for it. You're going to be competitive because, you're doing so well. And it's going to be really fun because you're going to do research the whole summer. And so she agreed to apply. She wrote a good application. I wrote her a letter and she got in. And so I was excited, right? I'm like, oh my God, you're going to have so much fun this summer. But when I talked to her, she said, I don't think I can do it. I think I'm going to decline the offer. And so I was disappointed. And honestly, I was a little annoyed because I was like, what? It's such a nice thing. And, it may change your life. And the reason that she was going to decline is simply that she was scared to leave behind her housing and her job. And even, because even though that summer program was paid, it was only paid $600 a month, $600 a week, sorry. Which in San Francisco, in the Bay Area, That's like nothing. That will not pay your rent. And so she was worried that if she would go there for 10 weeks and she would come back to the Bay Area, she doesn't have family in the area, she'd be on the street, you know, she'd be without an apartment and without a job. In the end, she did go, but only after we offered her our guest room for when she came back from the summer. And so she had a great time. You know, these are some pictures that she shared with me, and she allowed me to share it with all of you. She worked on small mammals, you know, capture, recapture, all kinds of, you know, cool ecology things. But obviously, our guest room is not a scalable solution for students to get into summer programs. So, you know, this story and many of similar stories motivated me and Rory to keep on offering part-time summer programs. And now our part-time summer programs are also online, so that is more available for more students. But I never, you know, quantified how many students are like Julia. So a couple of weeks ago, I went to some of my colleagues who were teaching undergraduate classes this semester, and I asked them to ask the students the question, would you go to a paid out-of-state summer research program? You know, given that this is, you know, there was like this little story, like research programs are important, you know, it'll help you get a job, would you do it? It turns out that almost half of our students would decline the opportunity if they had gotten in to an RU program for $600 a week. And so I asked them, you know, why? And so the answers, you know, now to me are maybe not very surprising, but I didn't know this before. So people are saying, I can't leave my job, my family needs me. I'm not sure I would like it, and then I'd be stuck for the whole summer. $600 a week is just not enough. I need to work to support my family, right? So for many of our students, even these programs that are sort of made for first-generation students, the students can actually not go there. And so, you know, I had to learn this. It's a little embarrassing, I think, now looking back, that I didn't understand that, like, you know, even a paid program is not, you know, is not enough for our students to be able to do that, to leave their homes. In addition to, you know, students not going to these programs are also not reaching that many of our students. As far as I can tell, there's about 800 RU programs, NSF-supported RU programs in the country, but they can only reach about 2% of all STEM students, all STEM undergraduate students at four-year colleges. And so clearly, they're not going to reach all of the students that we would like for them to reach. Our SKIP program, compared to our RU program, the SKIP program is about 1/5 of the cost. And we have about 15 times the participants. So of course, I cannot guarantee that part-time programs are the solution to everything, but I think that we should reconsider how we do summer programs, because the way we're currently doing it is just not gonna work for most of our students. Okay, so in conclusion, I've told you all of these things, the things that I've learned over the last 8 years, as I have built these programs together with my colleagues in the CS department, in the chemistry department, many people in the biology department, and in the psychology department as well. Hundreds of students have been through these programs. Some of them have been to several of the programs, some of them have just been in one of them. These students have gone on to get into PhD programs, into med school, they've gotten really nice jobs. And, you know, obviously that is super important and super motivating, and it's why I do it. I have bigger plans too. I want to change the field of evolutionary biology. I hope that, you know, 20 years from now, maybe at the end of my career, we don't have to worry about diversity in evolutionary biology anymore. But, you know, let's be real. These kind of things have to work for the professors too. right? So the programs have to work for the students. But I can already imagine that some of you are thinking, yeah, this sounds like a lot of work. And yeah, it's a lot of work, but I think it's maybe not as much work as you may think, or at least it comes with benefits too. So many of these programs have been generously supported by NSF, NIH, and the industry. And so this means that, that money means that I have to teach less than most of my colleagues. It means that I get summer salary. The group work that we have students do means that I have to grade less than most of my colleagues. And specifically in the PINK program where we have the mentors, actually the mentors do most of the grading. And so it's really lovely to teach in that program because of the money that is associated with the program. Of course, another benefit is that, when I started at SF State 8 years ago, it was hard to find a student to do research with me who had any coding experience. But now there's so many that there's no way I could accept them all into my lab. And so I have students who have a lot of skills. And, many of them are much better coders than I am. And so that is, a real luxury to work with. So I hope that all of this together has convinced you that it's possible to create programs that are attractive and useful for students, and that also can work for us as researchers and professors. And of course, I know that many of you in the audience, you're like, well, I'm not a professor, but you will be at some point someone who is in power, either as a professor or as a professional. And so you can do that too. So I would like to end with giving you 3 practical tips, 3 things that I think you can do in your lab or in your classroom or in a program that you're involved in. So the first thing is I want you to let your students learn in teams. I think learning together is almost always better than learning alone. And I want you to explain to your students why you're doing that so that they understand why they have to work with these other people. Then I want you to think about how you can make sure that your students, whether they're in your lab or in your class, or how they can see a vision for their own future. And so here I want you to remember the word scientist spotlight, because again, if you Google scientist spotlight, you will find a lot of resources. And then I want you to acknowledge and help alleviate the fear that many students have for computer science and math. And so if you offer a program, make sure that it's clear that they are really welcome and they can learn. And of course, with all of that, you have to talk to your students because you have to find out how it's going to fit in your students' lives. And with that, I would like to do some acknowledgements. And before I do that, I thought it may be fun to have everyone who is an SF State student who has been in one of our programs or an SF State alum to stand up so you can see how many people there are here. Over there, over there. Thank you, guys. And so the people that you just saw stand up, many of them are in my lab, but even more of them are in Rory's lab. And I want to particularly acknowledge Rory because, it's been such a pleasure and such a privilege to work with Rory. Many of these things have been developed with Rory. Rory is actually PI on the GOLD program. That's a data science for graduate students programs. If you want to, know more about it, you should talk to Rory. And Rory and I have been running part-time summer programs together since 2017. So thank you, Rory. As I said before, this is, very collaborative work. I have amazing colleagues in the computer science department who I've worked with now for 7 or 8 years, and we run several programs together, and it's really fun. Mary Gracie Anthony, who's here, is the coordinator of the summer skip program. responsible for 150 students learning R and Python this summer. Yay, Mary Gracie. And so with that, thank you all for your attention, and I can take questions. Thank you.
Hi there, I'm Rebecca Rogers at UNC Charlotte. One of the thoughts I had when you were talking about this is that some of these programs require institutional buy-in or other faculty or the administration supporting it or funding. And especially for new assistant professors, if we don't necessarily have the programs, or if the administration doesn't have the resources or the other faculty just aren't interested, what kind of recommendations do you have for what we can do alone? Like, I know I can recruit students to my own lab and try my best, but what sort of ideas do you have for how to make an impact in that situation and perhaps build up smaller programs that
Yeah.
bloom?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I realize that, like, I've been super lucky, like at SS State, we get a lot of support. And actually, one of the people who was involved in like some of these early programs became our dean. So she's like super supportive. But I think especially the summer programs that we run, they started very small. Like we started with, just like 10 students, and they would learn R, and then 5 of them would do a little project with me, and 5 of them would do a little project with Rory. And we basically used like a little bit of our startup money to hire some support for that. And so I think, especially the summer programs, they can start, very small with just a little bit of effort. And then you can recruit these students to your lab. And of course, some of the other things you may be able to do just in the classes that you have to teach anyways.
Sure, that
Yeah.
I could see for some of them.
Yeah,
some
I
of
totally understand, like, like running a program or a minor or certificate, it needs buy-in, it needs money, and it may not always be possible if you don't have the right people
Yeah.
in the
I can't
department.
submit an REU from my own lab, right? Like that usually
Yeah.
doesn't get funded, right?
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for a great talk. So I have 2 questions. The first one, you emphasize team working. However, my lab, I'm a PhD student, and my lab has only 2 PhD students, and we too are doing independent projects. So in this case, how do you suggest about team working?
That's a good question. So the question is, if there's only like 2 students in the lab, you're doing separate things.
Yeah.
How can you do, how can you be a team, or like how can you? So I imagine that in most places, there may be students in other labs and you maybe want to learn similar skills. You could do some of that learning together, even if you're in different labs. But I do understand, that like for you as a student, that may be hard to organize. Yeah, so I don't necessarily have like a, a canned solution for that. But I would hope that if there's stuff that is useful for multiple people, even if it doesn't have to be related to coding, right? It could be like, oh, we all need to learn how to write a paper, or we all need to learn how to write a grant. You could do that learning together in a collaborative way.
Yeah, and my second question is, so my own feeling about coding is like the basic thing can be acquired by general learning, but later on, we are mostly dealing with specific issues in the project. So in this case, how do you think like we can improve those kind of skills?
Like how do you learn stuff that is much more specific, like for your project, when you're no longer all learning the same thing? Yeah, that's a good question. So in my lab and in many labs at SF State, like this, I mean, it's different because we don't have PhD students, so students are not in the labs for that long. But like the master students, they work together in teams, and so they learn a lot of skills in classrooms that have team structures as well. But here's one other thing. I think that one thing that is useful is that even if you're learning your own thing, you could still, have a meeting where you say like, maybe Friday afternoon from 2 to 4, we're going to be in the same room learning new skills, even if like, you're learning this thing and I'm learning that thing, but we still share, the space, maybe share the coffee and cookies and like to make it a little nicer. You can still support each other even if you're doing your own thing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There's a question on Zoom. How much weight do you personally place on pro-sociality in collaborative groups, whether for learning or research? So pro-social
I
behavior.
missed one word. How much weight do I place on?
How much weight do you personally place on pro-sociality, so pro-social behaviors, in collaborative groups, whether for learning or research?
Oh, I'm not sure. I mean, I want people to be nice to each other, but I feel like they usually are. I would hope that if that's not the case, I would hear it, but of course I'm not 100% sure, because oftentimes a lot of that work happens when I'm not there, right? So I'm not sure. Yeah.
Do you think it's an important trait to develop? And possibly find ways to promote it using context-informed strategies?
I have to think about that. I'm not sure how to answer that.
Hello, thank you so much for your talk. It's really meaningful for me to see a talk like this because I got involved through science outreach programming when I was quite young and continued that through my career. So I have many questions for you, and I'll ask them later, but I'll keep it to just one. I really appreciate that these programs offer some funding to allow undergraduate students to learn and develop their skills in computer science. My question to you is, have NSF, NIH, and the other industrial partners contributed funding for compute infrastructure? I know that sometimes, depending on the university that you're at or the department you're in, they may or may not necessarily see the value in either allocating funds for things like cloud compute or allocating funding to just like have some servers that the students can work on. So I was wondering what your journey was like, if you did have that journey, in terms of like getting the funding for the compute infrastructure that you would need to run these programs.
Yeah. So I must admit that we have that I use almost zero infrastructure apart from my laptop. Well, that's not my laptop, and that is largely because most of my work over the last 10 years has been on HIV, which has a very small genome. And so I never have to worry about things not fitting on my computer. And so, yeah, no, we have had very little funding for infrastructure. I think the best we've done is like, with some of the industry money is like buy a bunch of laptops for students who don't have their own laptop. Yeah, so I don't have a solution for that. And I know that we need that and we haven't solved it yet.
I guess the follow-up question that I would have is, if you had a 90-second elevator pitch to your departmental chair, what would you say for like making the case for like developing more compute resources for undergraduate and graduate students?
Like for my department chair or for your department chair?
Let's say obstinate person who believes that bioinformatics can be done with point and click.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, again, I'm probably not the right person to make that pitch because I haven't needed these resources and I don't know how to use these resources. But I know that actually we have been having sort of these kinds of conversations in our school and in our, in our college and in our department, that if we want to, especially if we want to do serious research, And of course, many of these students get involved in research. Like if we want to do serious research, we need to have support, both in terms of like, machines, but also in terms of people, right? We need someone who can, who can help our students learn how to use these resources. It should not just be the professors who need to do that. I think we're not getting it yet. So clearly, I don't know how to make that.
It's okay.
Pitch.
A lot of folks don't necessarily know how to answer that, and they're like trying to convince their departmental chairs how to deal with this very problem. So I think it's something that's going to be ongoing in the field. Thank you so much for your talk.
Thank you. Thank you. I do want to say one thing about my department chair, actually. She is a cancer biologist, and last year she joined the SKIP program to learn R. So she is definitely supportive and also brave to try to learn this very new thing for her.
Thank you for an inspiring talk. A lot of the things resonated. I'm a software carpentry instructor, so a lot of the philosophy around what you're doing kind of resonated with the carpentries. And I was wondering if you do any collaborations with them to kind of increase your reach outside of the university.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I feel like, sort of reaching out to the carpentry or the carpentries has been like on my sort of to-do list for a very long time. And I always get their emails. Like, I think they send like a newsletter once a month. And I always think that they're doing such cool stuff. And I've borrowed some of their materials, but I have no connection with them. And I probably should. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, I have a speculative question. So because of your incredible effort and others, more people will eventually have better access to these data science and coding skills. And so do you think at some point the job market will eventually saturate and the data science, like these same skills no longer become as life-changing as it is now? And if it does, is that like how far are we from that point? And is that a future that we should look forward to?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So you're like imagining like if at some point all biology students become like super comfortable with Python and R and machine learning, then of course it's no longer such a cool thing to learn, right? Because everybody has it and it's not going to necessarily lead to, first of all, I think it'd be great if that happens, because I think we need that kind of, computing literacy to understand what's happening in the world, right? I think everybody should have a basic understanding of machine learning and AI, even if it's not going to be anything related to your job, just to understand what's happening in the world. I think that'd be good. But I understand that like sort of in the extreme case where this is like, hyper successful, it would no longer be the, I think currently like for our students, if they apply to a job, it looks really good if they have a minor in computing, but if everybody has a minor in computing, that's no longer going to be the case. Honestly, I think that's like so far away that I'm definitely not worried about that. But I'm sure that at some point there's going to be like another thing, another skill, something else that, we need our students to learn, whether it's like another language or writing or like, so we'll do something else if that happens.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, first I want to say thanks for the amazing talk. This is really, really cool work, and I thank you for doing this. So my question is about the Stories initiative for exposing students to what the life of a scientist is really like. And so I would argue that for doctors and dentists and nurses, people in, let's say, like previous generations would say that, oh, there's more utilitarian use to, doctors versus scientists. So how do these initiatives, kind of correct for that public bias that, oh, scientists working in labs, there's not as much utilitarian use as, a doctor seeing patients every day?
Oh, that's a good question. So how do we make sure that students learn that scientists are useful? I mean, I think the pandemic has probably done some of that. So I typically don't necessarily focus on that, but for example, in our in one of our programs, the biotech program, they actually did a seminar class where the whole semester was only about drug discovery. And I was not in that class, but Matt was in that class. So you can later maybe learn from Matt, who's over there. And so in that class, they, the whole semester was about all the different steps in drug discovery. And so I imagine that, that probably changed a lot of views on like, how do we even get drugs? How does the whole thing work? And what are all the different things that need to be done for that? There's probably stories in the Scientist Spotlight initiative about drug discovery and about other sort of, outcomes out of science that are like clearly useful to many people. But I don't necessarily want to emphasize that too much, because of course a lot of science does not have that sort of direct, measurable outcome. And I don't want to suggest to students like just become a scientist and you'll discover a drug or something like that, so but maybe it's good to include some of that so that students realize those cases where science is directly useful for a lot of people.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you.